Oh, the car was ready to be picked up.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Mary, who's going to do an acknowledgement of country.
Well, good morning and a warm welcome to everyone on today's information session. I'm honoured and delighted to open on behalf of OMNIS New South Wales, DV New South Wales and ACHIA by acknowledging and recognising the elders past and present and the emerging everywhere on all the lands that we are on today, who play important roles in homes, lives and communities every day to eliminate domestic and family violence. My name is Mary Renane Nee Orcher. I'm a proud Kamilaroi Cooma woman, mother, grandmother and wife. I have worked for more than 2 decades in frontline services, supporting women and children escaping domestic and family violence and bringing awareness to the broader community that domestic and family violence is a crime and to report it. My work has always been in regional, rural and remote areas, and my passion is to see all people live free of violence. I'm coming to you today from the Barkindji lands and recognise and pay my respect to the Barkindji people. Thank you.
I'm just going to run through some housekeeping items quickly. So first, we'll deal with questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to add questions to the Q&A functionality as we go along, and we'll go through those questions at the end. The Q&A functionality is different to the chat function. So Q&A is where the questions go, chats where other things go, and we'll be putting links to various things as we go along and at the end of the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, there'll be a survey, a link to a survey, and we'd appreciate your feedback and appreciate if you could complete that survey. Thank you. I'll hand over to Sharon now.
Good morning all, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This is another great opportunity for the Peaks to share the work they've been doing and the capacity building program that we've been involved in to support organisations interested in core and cluster, quite specifically this time around for the Tranche 3 procurement. So today we're going to look at what core and cluster is. Some of you may, of course, already be familiar with that, but we'll be going back over that. The core and cluster delivery model, more specifics about Tranche 3 procurement, the sector Peaks capacity and capability building that we've been involved in, the grants process, the grants that are available, some Peaks core and cluster resources. We'll be having a focus on Aboriginal-led procurement this morning, also on DFV, Domestic and Family Violence Specialist Service Delivery. We'll take a bit of a look at the interactive map of New South Wales women's refuges, which can assist participants to get a bit of a sense of where existing refuges are, but also where the rollout of the Tranche 1 and 2 successful applications were. And of course, we'll get to questions at the end there. So please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A. And like Dean mentioned, we'll be popping links and resources into the chat section. So hope you all enjoy it. Welcome, and we'll get started. Thank you. Thank you, Dean. So let's have a bit of a chat about what is core and cluster. Many of us are more familiar with it now. We have, lived with communal style refuges for women and children leaving and escaping domestic violence for close to 50 years now. But Core Cluster is a new type of development. It's considered best practice in the domestic and family violence refuge model sector in Australia and in some other places. So it's essentially a model that has a core of services, on-site specialist DFV support services, a DFV relevant support services, and communal space that involves meeting rooms, playgrounds, or a playground, green space, etc. It's so in that way, the core and the service delivery is considered somewhat separate to the accommodation itself. So that's probably one of the clearest defining features in terms of delineating core and cluster refuge models from communal models. So the cluster, which is the accommodation available for women and children, it's more autonomous, it's an independent living situation. Privacy is involved in terms of being offered self-contained accommodation with private bathrooms and kitchens, some shared facilities in terms of some communal space and so forth, but mostly well, not mostly, the cluster approach involves autonomous independent living for those families that need to come into crisis accommodation. This model is based on trauma-informed principles in terms of the design and delivery of the actual infrastructure, the bricks and mortar, and also the service delivery that is then provided to the women and children once they actually are in these accommodation services. Trauma-informed design is something that is might feel kind of new to many of us. I know it was for me. Yes, and we've been working with Samantha Donnelly from the University of Technology, Sydney, who I'll pop some resources into the chat, as I mentioned earlier, some resources based on Sam's work, and she is leading the way in providing what is now referred to as trauma-informed design and building principles. And there is a functional design brief that is available, and we'll pop that resource in as well, that Samantha had a significant amount of contribution to. So the core and cluster resources that are available on the Homelessness New South Wales site also includes a community of practice that was held in March by the Peaks, where Sam presented to organisations that were able to attend on her trauma-informed design principles. So, I'd encourage you all to have a look at that. So, thanks, Dean.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. My name's Dean Hart. I realised I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm from Homelessness New South Wales. The next slide, or series of slides, concerns the four elements of the core and cluster procurement process, or core and cluster project. So firstly, there's land acquisition, then building construction, asset delivery in the case of an existing building, then asset management and ongoing maintenance of the building, and then service provision. We'll go into these in some more detail. So firstly, land provision. This is a provision of land to build the core and cluster refuge. And it can be an existing site that has a building on it where it's going to be refurbished or redesigned, as well as a vacant block of land where a new building is going to be built with the core and cluster elements. In terms of options for land, there's the possibility of land being provided by the New South Wales government through the Land and Housing Corporation. And you can make an inquiry with them if you'd like to talk to them about the provision of land. There's a link on our website and information about approaching the Land and Housing Corporation. There's a possibility of council, your local council, providing land for the project. Also possible option where an NGO or business in the area provide the land as a donation or contribution or some sort of long-term lease. Aboriginal land councils may be in a position to provide land as well for Corin Cluster. And there's also the possibility of purchasing land or an existing building to be refurbished and used as a Corin Cluster refuge. The next element of the Corin Cluster model, delivery model, is the building or asset delivery. So this is construction of a purpose-built building with the Corin Cluster elements, as Sharon discussed, or purchase of a property that has a building on it that can be repurposed or refurbished to achieve the Corin Cluster configuration as per the design brief. There must, so in terms of asset delivery and Corin Cluster project more generally, there needs to be a community housing provider in the mix. So typically the community housing provider would work on the land provision, manage the building or asset delivery. There is the possibility that if an organisation that's applying isn't currently a community housing provider, if they can demonstrate that they can become a community housing provider before they sign the contracts with DCJ, then that's a possible option as well. And you can refer to the functional design brief for more details about the building and what it should look like, as Sharon discussed briefly as well. I'm going to hand back to Sharon to talk about the next couple of elements.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks for reminding me that I also did not introduce myself. So I'm Sharon Walsh. I work with DV New South Wales in the Corin Cluster, on the Corin Cluster project in the sector development and capacity building space. In terms of asset management, so once, once the Corin clusters are actually, is my video not working? Sorry about that, people. Apologies, I didn't realise I'd muted that. Yes, so in terms of asset management, obviously that involves management of the asset once it's been constructed and that women and children have come into the building, and that service delivery is underway. So a registered CHP or an Aboriginal CHP will have carriage of that side of the delivery of the services. And part of the tender needs to involve being able to demonstrate the capability of asset management and maintenance for up to, we think, about 15 years, essentially what is considered to be generally the life of the building. So, and moving on to service provision, so this is, Corin Cluster, the funding for Corin Cluster, it's the biggest, obviously very large, biggest injection of funds into the DFE sector that the sector has seen in a very long time, ever, actually. And so the emphasis for DV New South Wales, quite apart from being involved in supporting services around with Homelessness New South Wales and ACHIA in terms of procurement. But of course, we have a very particular interest and emphasis on the service provision, the service delivery that will be provided to the women and children who come into the Corin Cluster Refuge. Our domestic and family violence work is specialised work. It's acknowledged as such. It's acknowledged as such in terms of funding from DCJ. It's challenging. It's challenging work, and it's the specialised practice that's involved in DFE service delivery is something that we perceive that the women and children who come into refuges actually deserve. So an NGO needs to, an existing DCJ funded SHS with DV specialisation, or an NGO in terms of core and cluster, an NGO needs to be able to demonstrate capability, experience in delivery of DFE support services, be able to meet the SHS program guidelines, including ACES, including the Australian Service Excellence Standards accreditation. And many of you would already know that ACES is a new service standard framework that all DCJ funded SHSs are to hold by June 2024. So, we've been, obviously in terms of the work that DV New South Wales does, not all of the DFE service delivery in New South Wales is out of refuges or out of accommodation or SHSs, of course, but the work that is involved in refuges is considered specialised, as is the work in the broader sector. In that way, the DV New South Wales updated second edition of the Good Practice Guidelines is very relevant to those interested in tendering. There is an expectation that services will align themselves with the Good Practice Guidelines. I'll be popping a link to that and to DV New South Wales and the earlier work I mentioned, Sam Donnelly's work, into the chat when I finish speaking. And obviously happy to answer any questions in relation to that as we get to the end of the session. So thank you. So the Tranche 3 EOI opened on the 27th of April, and we're advised we'll be closing on the 13th of June. And following that and following assessment of those expressions of interest, various people will be invited to prepare a full tender. So there are some changes to Tranche 3 from Tranche 2. The expression of interest period has been extended by a couple of weeks to 6 weeks. We have, this is considered a reasonably big shift in that for this tranche in terms of EOIs, the floor plans and concept designs are not mandatory. It's not to say you can't have them or submit them, but they're not mandatory for this particular tranche. Anticipated costs are not mandatory, and even partnering organisations are not mandatory. Perceived or expected kinds of relationships or expected costs, those things can be referred to, but they're not expected to be precise at this point for the expression of interest. And again, we're all happy to answer more questions regarding this at the end of the session. So thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Sharon. Next we wanted to talk about the Sector Peaks Capacity Building and Capability Program. So this webinar and the various supports and resources that we've been working on is part of a project that's a collaboration between Homelessness New South Wales, Domestic Violence New South Wales, and the Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association. We're all working together to deliver a program of engagement in sector capacity and capability building to support successful core and cluster procurement and at the moment, obviously, Tranche 3 of the procurement process. Just wanted to mention that we've got some grants that are available. So these are for these are one-off grants, financial support for organisations that are participating in core and cluster procurement. The maximum amount of funding is $20,000. And our priorities for the grant funding is Aboriginal community controlled organisations, regional based projects, and smaller organisations which are defined as organisations with an annual revenue of less than $5 million. Also want to note though that while these are our priorities, organisation, in order to be eligible, you don't necessarily need to meet all of these criteria. And there's only one submission per organisation or partnership or consortium that's working on a core and cluster project. And we're accepting verbal applications from Aboriginal community controlled organisations. Next, I wanted to go through some of the resources that that we're providing to support core and cluster procurement. So firstly, there's a local government webinar. All these resources or links to these resources are on the Homelessness New South Wales webpage, and after I finish speaking, I'll put up a link to that in the chat function. But there's also on the bottom of the slide there the link to where the resources are. So secondly, there's the core and cluster information and resource document, which has a series of links to various information that relates to core and cluster procurement. Next, there's a series of resources on forming effective partnerships with organisations. This is developing your group of partners, your consortium to deliver the core and cluster project. There's a webinar, fact sheets and tools available. We also have a free tendering course, an online course that's available to organisations that are involved in procurement. We've put together New South Wales, there's some resources on the New South Wales planning system, trauma-informed design and land acquisition. There's webinars and fact sheets, and they'll be up. They're not on our website yet, but they'll be on our website next week. Next, we've got tender kickstart webinar planned for next Tuesday, the 9th of May at 1:30 p.m. And there's more information about that on our website and a link to register. So if you're interested in joining that free webinar, you're welcome to that as well. We're also available for meetings with services to provide support with core and cluster project development and procurement. And as I mentioned, the resources are all on our website. I'm going to hand over to Mary now.
Thank you very much, Dean. So my name is Mary Renee, and as I alluded to at the acknowledgement of country, I'm the Service Development Manager for Achia and in the Core Cluster Capacity Capability Project. My couple of slides is to encourage more ACCOs to participate in the Core Cluster Project. So what we have is a dedicated team. As Dean alluded to, the supports are there from all three peaks who are committed to supporting and providing individual and wraparound dedicated service. This group intends to bring a face-to-face service to you in your service at a time that is convenient for you. We're wanting to also have team members join online, so you get a good advice from a team of 5. We need to increase ACCOs because to close the gap and only with the 5 that's actually been successful with the trench 1 and 2 out of the 39 is simply not enough. We have a deliberate intention to get more cultural appropriate services for First Nation women and children. Slide 2, Dean. Through our group, we want to share our stories, our knowledge, our skills, and to stimulate best practice thinking for you, assisting you with the facts and all the resources that has been spoken about today. And just to help lighten your load and get you through. We can't do the work for you, but we are here to help and assist in every way. Why? Because we need more cultural appropriate sensitive services, doing it our way. Today, we're still hearing to 2023, we're still hearing stories of First Nation women and children falling through the gaps, not using services and still scared of the systems. So still choosing to stay and live with the violence and raise their children. We need you to increase the numbers and participate in the Core Cluster project. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. Look, I've just popped those links I mentioned into the chat. Realised I was a little bit hasty pressing enter. So if it runs on and isn't easily accessible, let me know and I'll submit them. But those links are on what I mentioned. So includes the DV New South Wales site, a link to the good practice guidelines, which are really very important for Core and Cluster. Also Sam Donnelly's work, a link to Sam Donnelly's work, and a video link, a YouTube link for the March Core and Cluster community of practice, which focused on, which was presented by Sam in terms of her principles of trauma-informed design. So really encourage you to go on there and have a look at that. So let's have a bit of a chat about domestic and family violence specialist service delivery. As I previously said, this is specialist work. I've taught in this space for a long time, and it was really interesting coming into DV New South Wales and getting to refocus on the specialised nature of the work of domestic and family violence, the work that so many do. So, and that work is, I guess, expected to be DFE informed and trauma informed practice, including gender informed and including practices of intersectionality. The good practice guidelines provide excellent level of resources to services, to people who have been in the field for a long time, who are new to the field or just been around for a short while, with various levels of qualifications. We know that that's how it operates in the DFE sector, more broadly speaking, but including in refuges. So currently Domestic Violence New South Wales is involved in building the resources to support Core and Cluster service alignment with those good practice guidelines. There's going to be further webinars, films, and resourcing around supporting services to feel comfortable and feel confident to align themselves to the good practice guidelines. They're excellent guidelines, they're not difficult, and they're strongly value-based and built on excellent foundational concepts. people have been working in this space for a long time now. And so the development of those good practice guidelines were intensely consulted across the sector. And so, we're very proud of how they've evolved. And of course, like I said, it's the second edition, so they've been significantly updated. In terms of some specific resources and sector capacity building from DV New South Wales in partnership with the homelessness and ACHIA, we have the COP program starting in March with trauma-informed design. More recently, that was with Sam Donnelly. More recently, we ran the trauma-informed DFE informed service delivery. Coming up in May, we have a real focus on core and cluster. So the trauma-informed and DFE informed service delivery COP, we had 2 long-term workers in the refuge space, one being our lovely Mary Renane, and also Carol Curry from the Women's and Girls Emergency Centre from WAGEG. Victoria has rolled out core and cluster more recently over, I think about 6 years, but maybe don't quote me on that, but I think so. Here in New South Wales, we do have some existing core and clusters, obviously the Orchard in Orange, but in terms of crisis accommodation DFE experience, it's still the communal sector that holds the bulk of the experience in that space. And so we had 2 very experienced crisis accommodation DFE workers present at that. For our May COP, it is focused on quite specifically on core and cluster policies and procedures, the shift from and the differences that might be required for the development of core and cluster, differently to communal crisis accommodation, things like the potential around working with older male children, pets, not having eyes on families all the time. As mentioned before, it's a significantly more autonomous, independent style of living, alcohol and other drug sorts of issues, just how policies and procedures in a core and cluster might look different to the previous communal setting. And then in June, we'll be having a community of practice on what does that actually mean in a core and cluster development? So building the core and what that can look like in a core and cluster development. So while the first 2 COPs were quite focused on trauma-informed work and its significant importance and relevance, the next 2 are more on the ground focus in terms of actually rolling out the service. So and in addition to that, we have the core and cluster good practice guidelines webinar that will be coming up, and I should remember the date and I don't, so I must get that. I'm so sorry. Yes, so the film and animation resources, some of which is happening today, actually, as we speak, to support alignment with the DV New South Wales Good Practice Guidelines. There's a very particular focus on Principle 3, which is the domestic and family violence informed and trauma informed specialist practice. This kind of practice is in and of itself different to it has its differences to more broad-based human service delivery and even other SHS types of service delivery. So what is that? What does that kind of look like? What is DFE informed and trauma informed specialist practice, and why is it important? Because it's really all about the safety of women and children who haven't been safe. I was mentioning to a colleague the other day that the practice rollout in the service delivery for core and cluster and DFE service sector, more broadly speaking, looks like the antithesis of what women and children have experienced in their lives in terms of, going through domestic and family violence. So it's really the opposite kinds of behaviours and kinds of approaches to responding to women and children. So, and with, you know, with that being based on women and children feeling safe first and foremost, implementing DFE informed and trauma informed policies. There'll be an animation resource to support the good practice guidelines and core and cluster in this space. And another feature of that principle is supporting the parent and child relationship, strengthening family relationships, helping children heal, helping women heal, helping lives heal. That is the focus of not just the good practice guidelines, broadly speaking, but quite specifically that principle within them. So, and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have regarding these. Thank you, Dean. Okay, so this is interesting, this map. Not a cartographer myself, but it is interesting. So if people access this map, it's DCJ, it's BOSCAR. It's a map from a heat map from BOSCAR around where existing refuges are in New South Wales, existing communal refuges, and where the first set of refuges that were successful out of Tranche 1 and 2, those 39 new refuges where they've been funded. So it's really important for people to have a look at this, and in terms of their areas, obviously. This map also provides insight into some crime statistics around DFE related assaults. It's data that's viewed through local government areas, and as I mentioned, it shows us existing refuges and then where the newer refuges that have already been announced, including Aboriginal-led services, including ACOs, and how they will, you know, supplement and complement what the services that are actually already there. So a little bit hard to see it obviously on the screen, but when you access that and you can expand it, and it shows you where they've been allocated from both those first two tranches. So it gives you an idea of what's left for tranche 3. Gives you a good idea, sorry, of what might be available for tranche 3. So thank you, Dean. I'll just take some water.
Hi, everybody. We're just going to run through some questions. There's a couple in the question and answer functionality there. If anyone's got any other questions, please put them in now so we can address those. So the first question we have, can we make an application to develop multiple core and cluster structures across New South Wales? If yes, do we need to submit one application per proposal CNC, or would one application covering all proposed CNC suffice? You'd need to check the procurement documentation and requirements directly, but my sense is that you'd need to put in one application per project. I don't think it's set up to take multiple, but again, as I say, you'd need to refer to the procurement documentation that's there. The second question, does funding cover capital works? The answer is yes. As we went through earlier in the presentation, construction of the building is very much part of the grant, part of what's covered by a core and cluster procurement funding program. Next question. What are the design and building restrictions if you are wanting to build a core and cluster in an R2 zone? Okay, this is a fairly specific question. Maybe best for us to take this offline. but I would direct people to the work that we've recently done on planning. On the planning system, there's a webinar and some fact sheets that'll all go up on our that we delivered the webinar a couple of weeks back. But a recording of that and the fact sheets that have been prepared to go along with that will be on the website next week. But the person who sent that message, if you want to send us a direct message, I'm happy to talk to you about your project directly and see if we can help with that. Okay, there's another question. Could you please speak further to the option of funding for redesign, redevelopment of buildings as opposed to new building? Sure. So in terms of redesign, redevelopment, it's certainly a possibility, but it's important that the resulting refurbished building meets the core and cluster design principles, which are outlined in the functional design brief. So there needs to be a core and there needs to be self-contained units. So it can't, so it needs to comply to all those things. So yeah, the building needs to have those features. Also, core and cluster projects need to be adding services, beds to the system. So the funding, core and clustering funding, can't be used to refurbish or upgrade existing SHS funded, DCJ funded specialist women's refuges. These need to be new refuges or new sites. Sharon, did you want to add anything on that? Sorry, you're on.
Very used to presenting, not so used to Zoom. So apologies for that. My answer to your question, Dean, was no, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Next question. For tranche 3, when are contracts with DCJ expected to be exchanged? I'm not sure that we can give you an actual date, but in terms of the timeline, there's the 6 weeks for the EOI, then the EOIs will need to be considered by DCJ, then successful EOIs will be invited to do a full tender, and there'll be a period for that to be prepared. And then sometime after that, DCJ will make a decision about which projects are going to go ahead, and then there'll be the contract negotiation period. So not sure if that helps, but it's a considerable period. Also in the documentation, the procurement documentation, there's indicative idea of when services are expected to commence. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure when it is. I think it's 2024. Sharon, do you remember?
Sorry, there was a bit of background noise here, Dean. Apologies. Could you just ask that again?
Sorry, just asking if you knew when DCJ have got some dates for when they want tranche 3 refuges to be up and going.
Yes, 2024, I thought.
Yeah.
However, as you know, previously we've heard anywhere from 24 to 26, 2024 to 2026. But a lot has shifted since then, and 2024 is considered more precise, yes.
Okay, a couple more questions here. Could you please speak to the program operational funding and how this may look different to current SHS operational funding? Has there been an indication that further specialist funding for child specialist workers, therapeutic workers on site, etc., will be funded? Sharon, did you want to take this one?
I will in a moment. Sorry about that. Been trying to kick this cough for nearly 2 weeks. It's part of it's needs to be considered in the parameters of your tender. Now, in terms of the core, there will be any number of possibilities around specialist workers coming into the core with women and children on site. So, but if your service is wanting to provide a particular type of specialist work, that can be involved. That can be involved in your tender. In terms of difference to program operational funding, it's unclear really, because the service delivery funding won't be available until it's still unclear to us, because service delivery funding won't be available until the services are actually ready to be operational. And at this point, it's been indicated that that funding is on that 3-year cycle. However, that we're also, waiting for potential announcements leading up to the election, as we know that the Labor Party had a different position around contracting. So it remains to be seen how that might shift. But at this stage, it doesn't look like it's very different at all to the current SHS operational funding guidelines. However, the tender can look at outside specialist services coming in. It needs to be considered, I guess. Yeah. I hope that answers it.
We are, just to add to that, we understand from tranche 1 and 2 that DCJ were encouraging people to include those additional specialist services as per kind of local needs and what services thought was appropriate.
And
sorry.
And Dean, is it useful if we mention that it did become apparent in tranche 2 that services were not necessarily doing themselves any favours by underselling what their requirements might be. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about making ambit claims, but it should be said that there can, people can be confident to look at what that service delivery can look like, should look like, and ask for it to be funded accordingly and appropriately. Yes.
Okay. Next question. Do we need to complete 2 financial capacity letters, one for asset delivery and maintenance and one for service delivery for the ELI? I'm a bit unsure what financial capacity letters are, but we do understand that there are 2 different agreements that are signed, one to do with building and maintenance and another one to do with service delivery. And as Sharon mentioned, the service delivery contract doesn't come into effect until the point at which the building's finished and ready to be operational. Also, just wanted to let people know that because of the way that's structured, i.e. the service delivery element, funding element doesn't come in until after the building's completed. If there were any costs of services that they envisage they'd be having to cover in the period of construction, so for instance, project management, they should be included in the construction part of the budget so that they can be covered in that part of the budget, and services can receive that funding when they need it, rather than having to wait until when the service is up and running. Next question. Please include me in the response regarding planning framework. The definition of group homes does not allow for more than one dwelling and needs to be amended, which is a process by the Department of Planning, I think it means. Is there a contact at the BOP that one can contact? This is kind of a technical planning matter. Just for the record, can I say that the group home definition allows for more than one unit. So group homes under the housing SEP is an option for core and cluster projects. And we believe probably the best planning option. This is covered in our webinar and fact sheets. But if the person who sent this question wants to contact us offline, happy to provide more information about this. Next question. Is there any indication around prioritising C&C refuge spaces for families versus single women? Any issues with mixed model or of single women and families in the cluster?
I'm happy to take that one, Dean. There's not an issue. The foundation of core and cluster is that it is flexible. And so depending on somebody's needs at the time. So if a single woman can be accommodated in a separate unit to families who, again, the design model allows for larger, families with any number of children and so forth. So the whole design model of core and cluster is built on the concept of flexibility, so that different people's needs can be met at the same time. So I hope that answers that for you.
Okay.
So
thanks, Sharon.
yeah, I probably should say that obviously the rollout the emphasis has been on women and children, but we also are very sensitive to the experience of single women and all sorts of women. So so that is a flexible model that can meet those needs. Yes. Okay,
the next question. These documents are required for the current EOI. Sorry, I don't really understand that question. The person who put that up, maybe you could rephrase that, and we'd be happy to respond. Next question. What is the ideal mix of 1, 2 or 3 bedroom dwellings in the core and cluster model? Can one have only one bedroom dwellings so that more number of dwellings can be provided? We don't believe there'd be an ideal number. It's really a matter of service providers identifying what they believe is the most appropriate appropriate combination given their clients and the local need. Sharon, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thanks, Dean. There's not an ideal. I mean, the functional design brief outlines, ideal number of six units, 6 flexible units, 6 to 8 flexible units. So given that it is a flexible model, services can look at how they can operate that. So that you might have a unit that has 3 bedrooms, you might have a couple of units that have only one, or you might have units, a number of units that are 2 bedroom that can be pulled together to house a larger family, i.e. with 4 bedrooms. It's the whole concept being flexible means that it doesn't have to be set around being 1, 2 or 3 bedroom size units. So
yeah, flexibility is the key. Yeah, is the key, and we think a good way to look at this, as Sharon talked about, was, you know, using lockable doors or movable walls to have units that can be,
Yes.
You can increase the size or decrease the size depending on the need. So could be 2 one-bedroom units that can be made into 1 2-bedroom unit, or 2 2-bedroom units that can be made into a large 4-bedroom unit if it's a large family. Those kinds of
Yes.
flexible options are encouraged.
And I'll just hark back to mentioning the functional design brief, which the link's gone in, but also the March community of practice that the Peaks ran through DV New South Wales. Samantha Donnelly's work. If you look at that resource, you will find some information that's helpful to that question as well, around how units can be flexible. So I hope that helps.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. If anyone else does have any questions, please put them in the Q&A functionality now. I'm just going to move to the final slide here, which has the contact details for all of us and others that are working on this project at the Three Peaks. So if you want to contact us, any of us directly, please do so. Also, various information, as we mentioned, on the Homelessness New South Wales website, and the links to the various things that we've mentioned today are in the chat function. You'll receive information about a survey. We'd appreciate it if you can complete that survey. Very interested in your feedback on today's webinar. Also, everyone will receive an email in the next couple of days with the links and a link to the recording of today's webinar. So you'll have that information as well.
And just encouraging people to stay in touch. You know, the Three Peaks, we're all available to, you know, this afternoon, for example, a number of us are attending one-on-one consultation. We're still available for those processes and that support program with services. So please don't hesitate. Reach out to any of us, and any one of us can actually organise a group consultative meeting with various services. So please do that.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. There doesn't seem to be any other questions, so we might end there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.